Alright, hey guys, here I am with another video, and with the content that I have been promising for a pretty decently long time, and here it is. This is the investment slash return tier list. So this is more of a resource that I'm going to be maybe making into a series depending on how everyone feels about it. Uh, this will be more of a resource for newer players. Basically, the gist of it is something. It's basically a guide for newer players and people who are not sure who to invest in and how good units are. So, how are these units being rated? So, these units are being rated within the green magical side of how good they are from their first summon. Then, as well, take into account of how much a player will get from them by putting time, feathers, skills into them. And then also take into account the long-term gain the average summoner will get from investing in these. So there's not a numerical kind of just best to worst. I'm trying to group it because saying this unit's the absolute best green is a really big statement to make. But you can make a general idea of which groups of units are generally better than others for the most part. Now, I will leave the one thing that each unit can be made good, but there are certain units that are easier to use in a team and put on any team and still perform well. And as another annotation, they are reviewed as a 5-star unit. So it's unfair to compare, for example, a Sonya to a 3-star Robin. I'm reviewing them all on optimal 5-star. So the rankings. So there, I have made 3 rankings, and I'm going from bottom to top. So tier 3. These are units that have major issues when just using them with their default kit. They can be made good, they can be made really viable, or perhaps even really, really strong, but they do require a lot of inheritance, a lot of time to make them really good. So, and then there's tier 2, which these are typically the more above average units. They're quite strong from the initial summon, and they don't require that much investment to be really good. They do have some flaws here and there that hurt their viability, whether it's because of their availability or because of their stats in one area, or just in general issues such as attack speed, just something that holds them back from just being the best of the best. And now the tier 1 units are the units that you can pull and immediately start using. They require maybe 1 or 2 skills um, to be really, really good. And at the worst, maybe they can be slightly hurt by IVs, but it's very, very hard to hurt these units and not be really good. So, starting off with tier 3, we have Bowie, Merrick, Female Robin, and Sorin. So, the first takeaway, which is kind of interesting, is when you look at all these units as a whole, they are typically the more quote unquote bulky units, especially between Bowie, Merrick, and Female Robin. So, the thing is, the issue with them is they invest so much into bulk, it hurts their offensive status, And because mages already suffer from BST issues, putting a lot of stats into defensive stats hurts their offensive viability. And because of the way the game is right now, having a very defense slow kind of build without having the additional stats to make up for it generally seems to hurt you as a whole. So we'll start off with Bowie at a glance. He came in a few months ago. He is available now as a 4 and 5 star. At a glance, you can tell he is pretty average on the speed scale. If in nowadays he's below average 27 speed, he would rather have no speed at this point because any really decently good unit will just double him. Like even the slowest units that are typically used are like around 35 speed, so they're going to be doubling him pretty much as a rule. Even if he's speed boon, he's going to get doubled. So at least his defense stats are good. He has pretty good HP. He has good defense, and he's got decent attack. But his res is really bad at 18, or in the worst cases 14, and even with a boon 21, that's generally not great. Especially because it means with his speed he's going to get doubled by a lot of mages. He's going to be taking a lot of damage. So moving on to a deeper analysis, as a base kit, he is really, really tanky. His kit complements his whole idea, which is a really physically tanky mage. He has Earth Boost, which gives him quite a lot of defense when initiating into him, or even when he's attacking. The 6 defense is fairly significant, and with Renewal backing it up, it means as long as he has more HP than the person who is attacking him, he will have that defense boost, which is quite nice because 6 defense with his base defense can't be ignored. With his tome itself, it's Grunnowl. It's an interesting idea. It does require clumping, but it comes with the penalty of his tome coming with a very mediocre 10, which is in nowadays really bad. So that's him without inheritance. After you look at him with inheritance, you start to notice his flaws with his stats itself. Due to his really bad res stat, he has issues dueling with mages. So he will almost never want to bait into units attacking him. And even in the worst cases, like a decently fast blue mage will just still kill him because he has a very bad res stat. He doesn't have this the res to even bait blue units, and he can't quite bait physical units because he can't counter without close counter. But he does at least have high physical stats, so he can at least do it in some occasion if you do decide to give him close counter. Also, due to his bad speed, if he ever wants to double, he either needs a breaker or QR3, a quick riposte 3, which means he's already down a B skill, which is kind of a shame. Onto his viable builds. Grunnowl is a decently viable build. With close counter, he does become at least a pretty scarily defensive mage, because if you take into account at least 2 units next to him, that's a 4 defense boost. He gets 4 attack. And then when you take into account other skills such as spurs, it does increase his stats gradually, exponentially. The downside with this is he is fairly expensive from the get-go. If you really want to make good use of this, he needs close counter. So otherwise you're already wasting his physical defensive stat because he can't really bait physical units and kill. He can only bait them, and in this metagame, if you're not at least attacking back, you're generally not accomplishing much, and you're just letting the enemies clump into you, which can lead to death on the next turn. So, though the other issue that also comes to this build has almost no good player phase because it requires a lot of clumping to really make good use. It's almost purely an enemy phase, so it means you only have one real phase to use him, which is occasionally a problem in not only arena because of horses that will just run at you, and also in maps where you will just have a bunch of units just summoning all at once. You kind of want to be more proactive rather than reactive in certain scenarios. So only having one phase to use them can hurt. I would say, as a whole, my final decision on it is it's really expensive to justify building toward for a pretty average player phase that needs very specific setup and only I would say pretty good enemy phase unless really invested toward. He does have the Grunraven build, which a lot of green mages can run, so he has a lot of competition. But the issue he comes with is, again, with his res stat. Sure, now he can not instantly die to decently fast blue mages, but he still can't fight green mages. He still will lose to green mages, which means he can't kill all blue mages as well because generally they have high res stats. So even with the triangle depth, he will a lot of times barely be missing KOs. So it's not horrible, but there are better options for this. But the upside you can think about it is he will at the least be taking almost no physical damage because of his high physical bulk combined with Grunraven's colorless resist, so he will almost take no damage from archers, though he still has to be wary in certain scenarios of blue mages if he's not running triangle depth. With triangle depth it's a little better, but you should still there are still cases where he might very well die when combined with skills such as Moonbow. Moving on, we have Merrick. So he is probably the most average along the line. He's the biggest case of a unit investing too much in HP and making every stat average, which hurts him as a whole. He is available at 4 and 5 stars since game launch, so it's very likely most players have gotten at least one copy of him at this point. His stat is not amazing, but with a boon, he does reach 35, which is respectable. It won't be doubling most of the better metagame, but it does mean he can reach a much better speed tier to potentially avoid doubles. His defense stat is pretty good. His res is decently bad, I would say, and his skills are pretty awful as a whole. So, as a base kit, his Excalibur is a neat option. It sounds really good on paper, but it's not strong enough to justify his rest of his kit, which is HP plus 5 and Spur Res. So, while he does have benefits over Bowie because of his mediocre attack and his mediocre res, it's it's really hard to justify his mediocre stats just because he has a preferred weapon. I would say his kit as a green mage is probably at base probably one of the worst in the game. He almost has nothing to inherit to give away. After inheritance, he's probably one of the better close counter mages in the game due to decently bulk, decent speed. Unfortunately, it goes back to a lot of investment into his HP stat means they're not invested into defensive stats, and HP stat as a whole is probably the weakest defensive stat because in the case that you get doubled, you're taking additional damage, and at 32 speed, he's in danger of getting doubled a lot. But on the upside, you can think of that HP stat being a very, very good option for Panic Ploy or Infantry Pulse because nowadays a lot of units take HP Banes. So as a teammate, he would usually give a lot of Panic Ploy to enemies as well as giving the cooldown reduction with the Infantry Pulse. Onto builds, we have Excalibur. So obviously the most obvious option when you look at him, he has a preferred weapon, that's additional HP, so why wouldn't you want to use it? It even comes with a special effect. It comes with higher base damage. Why wouldn't you use it, right? Thing is, you also have to take into account that a lot of flying units have really high res. And due to his mediocre speed, as well as mediocre attack, he's very, very likely to leave a lot of them with low HP stats instead of just outright killing them, despite having not only color advantage on some blue units, but also super effective. To give a perfect example of that, when he's attacking a blue unit such as, for example, Shanna, which is a fairly mediocre Pegasus as a whole. I wouldn't say bad. I think she's going to be really good in certain cases, but that's for another time. He still leaves her alive as a base kit, which is, you would think he would at least get a KO on all blues that are flying, but he doesn't even do that because of his fairly mediocre attack stat. Even with a neutral +3 attack seal and Fury 3 and Lancebreaker 3, his matchups when attacking into units are not that amazing. With that much attack going into it, having Lancebreaker 3 so he can try to kill most blues, or at least blue lancers, he doesn't have that amazing of a matchup slot. He has so many draws. He still loses quite a bit. And then that's before taking into account enemy skill inheritance such as distant counter, fury, or other such skills. I would say as a whole, Excalibur should just be ignored. It doesn't even do its hard counter job against flying units well, and even when building completely into him, it's honestly not worth it because flying units cover such a small portion of the metagame nowadays, even with that in account. Now, Dark Excalibur is a whole different can of worms, though. Thanks to the new Weapon Forge system, this has given new life to Merrick. So, while you might think, hey, didn't you just go on a huge tangent of his mediocre stats? Yes, but Dark Excalibur is a huge, huge different beast. The plus 10 damage when the special procs cannot be ignored. To give you an example of how good this is, you can tell I made another matchup summary, which is also a good comparison towards old tome. If you give him close counter and close defense Sacred Seal and switch his special for Moonbow, he becomes a surprisingly bulky and bursty mage with you also give him quick riposte. So his matchups across the board are ridiculously good if he baits a unit into attacking him. So only the really strongest red mages are able to defeat this Merrick. So keep in mind, I do want to add the one note that this is as a base kit against other units without merges or without their skill inheritance. It's very hard to say if it's the best or if it's even that great in use, but this was just as a comparison to show how much of a difference Dark Excalibur is compared to the other one, and also give a viable option. I do think it's hard to say how good this is before actually making use of it, but it is viable, and it can be really good under the right circumstance. So I just wanted to bring it to the table as an option that also shows that he does have his own niche. So moving on to next unit, we have female Robin. So her availability is only through Grand Hero battles as of now. She's available at 2-star, 3-star, and 4-star. So her kit, her stats are okay. It's balanced across the board at 29, 29, 29, and 22 with a fairly respectable 40 HP stat. Moving on, right as a base kit on to her, it's really not that great. It can really be described as the anti-Blue Cav or the anti-Ursula unit. She's good at countering what she wants to counter, but it's a very specific, very, very specific cut of the metagame. She has trouble KOing units that are not blue and on a horse. It's a very specific scenario, but it means she can be very good on the Ursula map, for example. I would say, as a whole, it's not as bad as Merrick's, but it does have its own share of issues. So after inheritance, we can look at her kit and her stats, and they fit better in line with the male Robin, and it makes sense because they have almost, I believe, the exact same stats. So she can be run as a variant for the green counterpart of male Robin. A good defensive color means Grandhaven is viable, and she can also run even her Wolf Tome to counter Reinhardt. And she even comes with a blue Tome Breaker. Not that she really needs it, to be perfectly honest, because Reinhardt is very slow, but it does mean she can counter other units such as Ursula or Olwen if they happen to be running Blade Tomes. So, onto her builds. Grandhaven is once again viable, as with most green units. I wouldn't say it's extraordinary or particularly stand out compared to all the others, but it's another option. It's always good to have defensive green units in this current metagame, because if you've ever done Arena or Arena Assault, you will notice that there are a lot of horses such as Reinhardt and Bravelyn in the current Arena meta. So it's always nice to have an option against them. She does what she needs to do very well. It's okay. I would say there's nothing particularly stand out about what she does compared to, for example, Bowie or other Triangle Adept Raven Tomes, but she does what she needs to do, which is all you really need to do in other modes. Grandwolf. So this is I would say, the cheap per variant in case you don't want to completely retool her kit. She still does her job of killing Reinhardt if you're running Triangle Depth. Unfortunately, due to not having the advantage against colors anymore, she cannot bait Brave Lins as pretty much at all anymore, especially if they happen to be running a Brave Bow variant. But I mean, she can still, in some cases, KO them. It's a bit harder now because not only does Bravelyn have a fairly decent res stat, but she doesn't have the speed to double, and she won't always be running her B skill as Bowbreaker. So even in taking into account the buffed Wolf Tome, I wouldn't say it has changed her matchups massively. It's only about a 2 BST buff, and even if you're ignoring Cav buffs, it doesn't massively change her matchups. So she still is decent at what she does, but she doesn't do it astoundingly well due to fairly mediocre offensive stats in speed and attack. So just give me a moment. I'm just going to take a sip of water. Moving on directly to Soren. He is available at 4 and 5 stars. His stats across the board can really be described as average. They are not as average as female Robins. He is invested quite a bit more into attack and speed, but his base kit has suffered as a result. His base kit is, I would say, among the worst for the Green Mages. If you really want to make use of him, you need to basically completely gut his skill set. His B skill, Water Sweep, is not amazing. His Tome is not great. And Fortify Res is not awful, but it's not really amazing either. And even like when he was initially released, he had to compete with units such as Nino. After Inheritance, he just needs to be completely changed. Again, like I said, but he is now basically a jack of all trades. So I don't say this lightly. That's not to say he's bad. Just because he's a jack of all trades doesn't mean he's bad. It means he's very malleable. It means that he can be changed to whatever the summoner needs. He can run a lot of different builds because he has pretty decently good attack, pretty decently good res, pretty decently good speed. He's got pretty decent HP. His only bad stat, I would say, is defense, which can still be patched up. So, on to his builds. As a note, I'm completely skipping his tome. His tome has no real niche, and unfortunately, the weapon refiner didn't add enough to his weapon to really justify using it over basically any other tome. So, Grunraven, I would say, is viable to good. He is faster than his counterparts, such as Bowie, and as well as female Robin, which does matter in quite a lot of cases. It means he can naturally double Reinhardt's more. His, I would say, decently mediocre defense set, however, does mean that in certain cases it will hurt his ability to bait archers, and if he chooses not to run Triangle Depth, if he has a minus res stat, it will hurt his ability to bait units such as Reinhardt. I would say it's definitely worth building and considering, but it probably is debatable if it's worth investing in compared to other competing Grand Raven users because of his mediocre defensive stats compared to the more defensively inclined because he puts stats that could have been into pure defense stats into offensive stats. I would say he's at least worth looking at depending on your team lineup. His other viable build is Blade Tome. Because of his decently good speed and attack, it means he can run Blade Tome fairly effectively. Also, having a fairly decently high rest stat means he can trade blows with other mages on a fairly decent occasion. I would say, once again, because he is, once again, jack of all trades and balanced across the board, it means there are other units that have more specific stats put purely into attack and speed, which means it's hard to justify investing highly into him compared to other mages such as Nino. And more importantly, due to his speed not being as good as those competing, it means he won't get doubles, which massively hurts his matchups. He's not bad, but I think there are better options for Blade Tome. But if you really love the character, or if you need a specific niche that his stats will give to you because of his higher res, his decent HP, he's definitely worth at least looking at. So, moving on into the completely new batch. This is Tier 2. So, the first thing you'll probably notice is it's full of seasonal units. Of this whole tier, the only two who are not are Rajat and Sonya. This is purposefully done mainly because not only are they hard to summon, but because of their limited status, it means that they will, for the most part, not be getting merged up into plus 10, unlike Rajat and Sonya, or the other units in Tier 3 or Tier 1. It means it hurts their overall potential in the long run. But because of the way they're situated and their uniqueness, they, however, still justify being in a better batch than the other units. So that's enough of that. Let's move on right to Rajat. So she is available right now as a 5-star. She could very well bump down to a 4-star. If that does change, I will change the annotation to reflect this. But as of now, she's only a 5-star exclusive, and I'm putting that into the video with that note. Her stats across the board are pretty good. She has the glory of the stat boost. So her stats across the board are pretty good. Pretty good speed stat, pretty good attack stat, and pretty good defensive stats. So her base kit is pretty decent. She even comes with distant defense, but her tome is a very specific hate tome against horses, so it does mean, due to it only targeting horses for the bonus effect, it means her matchups across non-horses is hurt as a whole. Her average bulk on both sides means she is better at taking physical than potentially other mages, but it's still not astounding. It could have been better invested into res to match up, to better shore up her mage matchups. So I would say it's okay, but it could have been better invested, and even those extra 4 or 5 defense stats aren't gonna massively affect her matchups against archers as a whole. So when you look at her stats, 35-34, which is 35 attack, 34 speed is not bad. But as a whole, 34, 36 from Nino is just better. Better speed means more doubles. It means getting doubled less. As a whole, it's just a superior stat lineup. After Inheritance, I would say she can perform pretty much every role decently effective, but you do pretty much have to change a decent amount of her load up to do well. She is, however, a better jack of all trades than Soren, because not only does she have a BST increase, but her stats are invested better into attack and speed and res. So she's better than Soren, and that's why she is bumped up to the tier 2 area. And an important note to have is due to her increased BST status, it means she fits into the BST range of comparable melee horse units. So she is for using her, you're rewarded a little bit more with better arena assault and arena score. On to the actual builds. Grunraven. You're probably getting sick of me saying this at this point, but it's viable. She's one of the faster green mages, and she also comes with this in defense, which means you don't have to take it for someone else. So it's her kit as a whole is pretty decent from the get-go to use this setup. You don't have to give her Triangle Adept 2 or 3. So having the distant defense is already nice. It's not as amazing as Triangle Adept, but you can't ignore 6 defense or 6 res when being initiated on. So I would say she's definitely worth building. She's probably one of the better Triangle Adept Grunravens. It really depends on your team needs. For the people who want to make a budget build, you honestly don't need to change that much on her, though. All you really need to put really on her is Deflect Magic, and she will be good to go for tanking Reinhardt's for the most part. Not only because of her decently good rest stat, but because her effective status means she will be one-shotting a lot of Reinhardt's, or at least getting the double on them to kill because of her good speed. So she is pretty average as a whole, but she does perform that role better than female Robin, not only because she has her buff tome from base, but she has higher base attack and higher speed, which means she will be doing more damage and doubling more units than her counterpart. So it's definitely cheap to build, definitely worth building, and if nothing else, she's good for just putting a skill or two onto her and being used for arena assault. Grunblade. So she's one of the faster green mages. This alone makes it obvious that she can probably use Grunblade. I'm not going to go too much into it. It's good, but once again, outclassed by Nino, and it's hard to justify putting so much investment into her when you could, if you're spending that much resources, you could have probably made a better Blade Tome with Nino, who is also easier to summon. It's okay, up to your own discretion. I personally would not do it. So now to Sonya, currently only available as a 5-star. Just looking at a glance at her stats, they do sit at a pretty respectable 31 speed and a very, very respectable 36 HP coupled with 32 res. Her defense does suffer, unfortunately, which is a shame, but she's definitely a unit who is made to want to dual mages, which is exemplified by Mirror Strike, which gives her res and attack when attacking, and Res Ploy, which lowers res of units in diagonal directions when she has more res. She also comes with Dark Excalibur, which synergizes perfectly well with Moonbow, already in her base kit, which means you don't have to inherit it. So Dark Excalibur, as I said before, gives the plus 10 damage upon special initiation, which synergizes perfectly with Moonbow. So as a whole, she's summoned, and she comes with a pretty good kit, I would say. She probably wants to be replacing her ace skill for something a little bit better, just because giving defensive stats when you're attacking isn't necessarily what you want to be doing, because the res isn't going to always be relevant. Now, you could say it helps her duel better with mages, which while is true, you don't always want to only fight mages. Sometimes it'll be nice to just have the always +2 from death blow, or in some cases maybe the additional speed. So on her release, she was compared with Soren and Julia quite a bit because of her bulkier stats and decent speed, and she is very good at baiting, as I said, because of her fairly decently high stats on the magical side. But she does have a problematic speed tier at 31 or 34 speed with a boon, which limits her player phase, as a lot of units nowadays are at 35 plus speed. So that does mean that when you take into account boons or fury, etc., they'll be hitting up to maybe 38 speed. So even with darting blow, she's gonna have a lot of trouble doubling a lot of these units. So you can definitely try to mitigate that with hones, etc. But even if it's you're trying to, you do have to put a lot into her speed to make her double at that point. And she does really appreciate doubling because her tome does better when you proc specials, and Moonbow is the lowest proc special, and you get it more if you are doubling. So, as I said, she does get better when you give her better A skills other than Mirror Strike, but it doesn't massively change all her matchups. So she does still have some troublesome matchups across the board, just because she sits at a problematic speed tier. So I would say the only real good, viable, strong build on her is Dark Excalibur. It's a fairly well investment build as a whole. You'd really only need to change her B skill because she doesn't have one to begin with. Just put your choice of B skill, breaker skill, and she's pretty much good to go. Her A skill is another one you should probably look into replacing, but it's not as urgent as her B skill. Definitely you want to put something better, such as Darting Blow to try to mitigate her speed, or Death Blow 3 just to make her nuke harder. And also put on your support skill of your choice. She could arguably run other builds, yes, but then she comes into the problem that Soren has, in that she is a jack of all trades, but she doesn't perform anything magnificently well. So I would say, as a whole, you might as well stick with Dark Excalibur and just skip the other tomes, just because she does have at least this niche of her tome that no other green mage can really do. Even Merrick can't quite do it, just because they do have completely different stat allocations from each other. We are moving to Spring Camilla, and to be honest, from her stats, she is a very physically defensive mage. She has mediocre speed, to say the least. 25 speed is not winning her any awards. 35 attack is pretty huge, and her defense stat, her HP stat is pretty high. Her res stat does suffer quite a bit, unfortunately, though. So, before Inheritance, to put it lightly, she was not great. Her her kit as a whole is not that amazing. Defiant Speed is trying to fix her speed, but it's only fixing her when she's almost dead. Her egg, which is her tome, is not that amazing. It's supposed to try to make her a longer fighting unit by healing her. It's just not that great. It doesn't really work. She's defensive, physically defensive, but she's not able to counter, and her res is fairly low, so she can't duel effectively with other mages. And her defense, while you could say it helps her not take as much damage from archers, she still is slow enough that most archers will be doubling her and killing her, even if they're not one-shotting her, which a lot of archers will probably just one-shot her just because that's the nature of the game when they have weakness advantage. So after inheritance, she becomes a whole different beast. To say she becomes better would be putting it lightly. She is really, really good. So you do have to put quite a bit into her to make the best use of her stats, but if you do, you will have an extremely good unit. She's able to counter Reinhardt and Bravelyn with a Raven Tome. She's able to become a huge nuke with Blade Tome. She's just really, really good. It does, like I said, mean she needs a lot of investment. That's why I can't justifiably put her at the top. She also needs a team around her to really shine. Her stats are not amazingly allocated to be an offensive threat, so she really appreciates the hone and fortifies to do her tanking job better or her offensive job better. And because she's limited, it's hard to pull her because she's only on specific banners, which means you only have limited time to get her, and it also limits the kind of IVs you get, and also limits her final potential because you can't easily get her merges unless you are a higher spending player. Gromblade is probably the most scary build to see in Arena of the any builds that she could run. It can't be ignored how much a 24 buff to her attack that's already pretty massive is actually. She doesn't even have to double a lot of units to just kill them outright. She will just outright kill a lot of blues, greens, and in some cases even reds. So it does come with the weakness of panic ploy, which means if she ever happens to get panic ployed, she will become almost a non-threat. But her decently good HP stat means she can't be panic ployed by every user of it. So it's expensive to build, but it is extremely powerful. She now has competition from Halloween Naui and Summer Corn for offensive mage threats, but you can't be ignored. And honestly, she is the only green offensive or any a green mage flyer. So she already fills in a niche that can't be really filled exactly by any other unit. Grunraven is a much more reactionary build. It's very much a bait unit into you. It baits Reinhardt's and Lynn's and also fulfills the double job of just completely taking away the archer issue that most flying emblem teams have. Also, due to not running Gromblade, she doesn't need as bad all those stats to perform as well. She'd perform better with them, but it means she can be used outside of those teams. Now, the annotation that should be noted is that you will still have trouble if the archers happen to use Cancel Infinity and you are using Triangle Depth, which most of Grunraven builds should. So, this build will have trouble in the case that the archers happen to be running Cancel Infinity. So, as a whole, I would say this is very expensive to build, and I would say probably more expensive as a whole than the Gromblade because of needing really Triangle Depth 3. But it's really powerful, and the amount of mobility you get from being a flying mage is astronomical, and not being limited to only being in a flying team, unlike the Gromblade, means it's a really good build to invest into as a whole, I would say. So, moving on, we move on to Halloween Henry. He is 5-star limited, and also the unique title of only mage armor in the game as of now. Surprisingly enough, he is fairly fast, unlike the contemporary Red Henry. And unlike his contemporary, he has a really good rest stat. I would say, as a whole, before Inheritance, it's not bad, but his kit is not really that amazing either. It's not astounding, I would say. He can cause panic to allies around him, but there are much better options. So that brings us to Inheritance. He becomes a scarily defensive unit with a pretty decent offensive presence. You want to ignore him, but it's hard to ignore him due to the options he has for his tomes. So, once again, you will ask, why is he here, not at the top? Again, I have to answer, he is a limited time unit. So, he cannot be merged, and it means it's very hard to get good IVs. Unless you happen to be a higher income player. But, and also, the other issue is he needs a lot of team support to really shine at the best of his ability, meaning you can't put him on every team. You have to have an armor team to really make good use of all his stats. So, moving on to his actual builds, Gronraven. I know you guys are probably getting tired of it, but it's a really good tome, and with the current metagame, it should be discussed on any unit that can run it. So, this is definitely a more enemy phase unit. He baits units into attacking him, and he kills on the counterattack. While his speed's not bad, it's not amazing, and most armor teams don't run speed buffs, so it means he probably needs to run QR3, Quick Repose 3, to KO all units that attack into him. So, he is definitely worth investing into. He does his job very well, and most armor teams have issues with cancel, affinity, or Sakai's Blessing Bolin, so he performs his job fairly well, and honestly, he doesn't even really need Triangle Depth because of his fairly good defense stats, which combined with the defensive buff from armors. So it's not always the best build, but it definitely shines even when paired with just a distant counter armor unit such as Black Knight. So his second build is Gronowl. So you might not have expected this, or maybe you did and you were excitedly looking forward to this. So the natural nature of armor units is they clump. They tend to be within a few squares of each other, and this means that Gronowl naturally can come into play because he wants a couple armor units right next to him. And he usually wants to end with maybe one or two because of armor march. So, Gronowl seems like an obvious choice. So, you might be looking at that and you might be thinking, wow, that's a lot of wins. So, I will leave that this is an optimal status. this is in the case that he has 3 units next to him and he has ward armors. So that brings him up to a monstrous plus 18 defense and res. And with close counter, it means he becomes ridiculously hard to approach. So I did give all the units who were attacking to him Fury 3 just to try to even the playfield a little bit and take into account a little bit of the mergings. And it's pretty... The results speak them for themselves. The only units who are able to kill him in this scenario are Tobin, Hana, and Arden. Definitely these change after skill inheritance, and if you start taking away his buffs from having a unit next to him. But even in the case he gets even just the wards from the armors, it still is significant. Plus 12 defense or res is really good. So, as a whole, I would say this is really good in the hands of a player. The CPU will almost never use this very well. As well as a player will anyway. But it's definitely a tome to at least look at as a whole. Gromblade. So, it's definitely good as with all other mages. And due to his high defense stats, it means if he happens to get a couple buffs, he will be able to not only take the hit, but be able to retaliate back with a huge buffed up Gromblade. So because of passable speed and attack, it means it should be an obvious choice, right? But it's deceptively mediocre, I would say, on him. So due to the way that armors work, he is not able to initiate into enemies as freely as others. He will need to have an armor unit next to him to get his armor march buff next turn, or he will be a liability due to only being able to go to a one move. So, and also due to the way armor teams run a bunch of wards instead of actual buffs, it means he requires a lot more specific setup, which also hurts his fellow compatriots. I would say it's probably the worst tome on him, but it's not bad. If you happen to want to go for it, it's not going to perform badly, but I do think the other options are probably, as a whole, more malleable to armor teams. So, now moving on to Inigo. So, his kit is pretty bad. His stats are pretty bad. He got hit with, I would say, the fortunate and unfortunate glory of being a dancing mage, which means he got penalized for being a dancer, and he got penalized for being a mage, which tanks his stats as a whole. So his stat allocation is pretty mediocre. His offensive shred is pretty mediocre, meaning he's going to struggle to kill most units. After you inherit into him, he does his job of countering Reinhardt or Bravelyn fairly well, but due to mediocre stats, he does have trouble tanking both of them at the same time, unlike his other mage compatriots. So, but you do gotta keep in mind that even a dancer with 1 HP is still a dancer. He will still be able to perform his job on the team and do something, unlike other times where units become low HP liabilities that can't fight anymore lest they get killed. So, Gromraven is probably his only really viable build due to his really mediocre stats. But even if it is his only real viable build, he does it well. He counters Reinhardt and Braveland with Triangle Depth, and if he at least eliminates one, if not two, he's already done his job, and then he can just spend the rest of his turns alive just dancing, and some people just put dancers for that flexibility of just moving twice. So the only downside I would say is would be his downside as a dancer, which is he is easier to bait than his other compatriots because he has an additional range, which means he's easier to move away from the pack and kill. So, as a whole, I would say he's definitely very good and definitely very viable and definitely worth building. He's a little on the expensive side due to replacing not only his ace skill but his weapon. But if you do have the feathers to burn, he is definitely very good. So, summer release. Another limited unit, who would have thought? So, as a whole, her stats are pretty good. A 36-34 is good. She comes with surprisingly very similar stats to Rashad. Her stats are good, but her kit is not that amazing, I would say. So, going right into it, it's okay, she's fast. But after Inheritance, there was a decent argument at a point whether Elise or Nino were better because it was thought whether the two attack secured more setup matches and killing or the speed did. I would say they're both viably good. So why isn't she at the top? Again, seasonal unit limits her IVs available and also limits her ability to merge in the long run. Groundblade. Again, she can basically run the same setup as Nino with the annotation that she has additional attack but 2 less speed. I would say she's definitely worth building if you have a plus attack or plus speed variant, but it's very hard to justify against Nino, again because you're inheriting her tome onto another green unit. But she's definitely worth at least mildly investing in because Arena Assault and having another Blade Tome green unit can always be good. Unfortunately, due to bad defensive stats, I can't recommend running any Raven Tome on her, so I am skipping that. So that brings us to our final batch, the strongest out of the box: Nino, Julia, Deirdre, and Cecilia. So we're just gonna go right into it with Julia. Only available as a 5-star. Her defensive stats are really bad, I would say. 13, 17, 20 is nothing to write home about, and a speed stat 23, 26, 30 is okay, but it could be a lot better. Her red stats are really respectable though. So, before Inheritance, I would say she was a fairly strong mage. She could take care of the blues fairly effectively, and she had the ability to kill the dragon units, which were quite a bit around Arena, especially Tiki, because of her ability to counter Hector's back in the day. So, after Inheritance, she's still much of the same, but she's still a good mage. She's still good at nuking dragons out of orbit, but she now has access to Fury and Distant Defense, which helps bolster her speed or her defensive stats. So, why would you say then is she a lot better now from before and after skill Inheritance? It's a matter of the metagame changing. the metagame changed to such a way that she just does really well. She requires almost no investment to be the counter to Reinhardt. She can sit there, take his attack, and kill him almost on every single instance. And her B slot being malleable means she can change it to best suit your team. Whether it be QR3, whether it be Green Tonebreaker to kill other opposing green, whether it be Axebreaker so she can kill other axes, or Bowbreaker if she want to happen to kill other archers. So, her only real amazing or good option, I would say, is Naga. So, it's fairly flexible in nature. As I said before, she has a lot of options for her Beastgo to take out who she wants with Fury, but she does have an additional option of running Distant Defense 3 alongside Distant Defense 3 Seal, which alongside Naga's Tome gives her a very, very respectable 14 defense or 14 res, which can't be ignored. So it means she can bait most units into attacking her, and due to her high attack stat, it means she will not only chunk most of them, but in many cases just eliminate them on the counter. So Divine Naga is, I would say, it's not a direct upgrade if you, unless you ignore the loss of +2 defense and res because of her ability to ignore enemy buffs from Hones/Rallies. It's definitely an option. I would say her default Naga is good enough as is, that you don't necessarily have to change it, but it's definitely an option in certain scenarios. So as a whole, I would say she's good, she's strong anti-meta, and she doesn't really need much investment, if any at all, to do her job well. Change her A skill to Fury, and you basically have one of the best Reinhardt counters in the game. So, she does have the option of Gromraven, which I will at least discuss because I have seen it quite a bit in Arena. It's very hard to justify compared to having her default Tome, which already comes with quite a bit of effects, but it comes with the same idea of other Raven Tomers who have high attack stats, that due to her high attack, she can one-shot a lot of archers. So with this, she serves as a much more solid Bravelyn counter compared to her previous, but again, it's very hard to justify. If you really are looking for a counter to Bravelyn and Reinhardt in one unit, it's an option, but I could not recommend this at all. Then we have Deidre. So, if you look, her kit is very much similar to Julia. So, before Inheritance, she does support much of the same that Julia does for her team. She has a bit more speed, and she does come with Divine Naga, so that's something to note. But they do have very similar niches. So to give you an idea how close they are to each other, she has -2 HP, -2 attack, and -1 defense compared to her, and 2 more defense and 3 more res. So as a whole, they're very similar. She's a bit faster. She does sacrifice a little bit more attack and a little bit more HP though. So I would say they're almost the same unit. It's any compliment I can give to her, I can give to Julia. The only upside I can really say about her is that she comes with naturally with speed ploy and quicker post 3, which does help shore up her matchups. It means she's lower to invest, but speed ploy doesn't massively change her matchups, so it's more of supporting her teammates. So she could run also other builds such as Raven Tome, such as Julia, but the 2 attack loss already hurts her matchups, and lower defense also hurts the matchups. So if you're going to go for that route, you might as well go into it Julia. So as a whole, she's good. She's definitely worth building. And if you have either Julia or Deidre, definitely units into look into investing into. So now we move on to Cecilia. Moving on to a horse unit. Available at 3 and 4 stars. So I would say just looking at her stats, they are very mediocre across the board. A speed of 25 is not great. Defense, not great. Res, okay. Attack, okay. Her skill set's just bad. I would say she comes with the very rare Raven Tome unit, which before Inheritance was really good, but a very balanced stats just hurts availability. She's just a jack of everything, but she's a master of none. She does this worse than even Soren, which is very bad. But after you inherit, she is really good. To say she got the blessing of the god by getting the ability to get horse buffs would be an understatement. She got access to Blade Tome. She got access to better teammates, meaning she did not have to run with Gunter and Jagen to get all those horse buffs. It's just not something you can sit on. And she is one of the better counters to Braveland and Reinhardt's due to coming naturally with Raven Tome. So, and she only really needs 1 skill inheritance of TA3 to just perform splendidly. And if you happen to change her beast skill, she just does it even better. That coming from the 3 and 4 star pool also means she is fairly easy to summon. So moving on to her actual builds, I do want to leave just the note that this is taken into account with teammates that come with horse buffs. Without it, she struggles to break away from the herd. She needs those buffs very badly to mitigate her balanced stats. So Gromblade, to say a 24 damage nuke can be ignored would be straight lying to you. So to get a +6 in every stat on her means she will be coming at you with up to a +24 attack bonus just from the actual stats, which then you have to take into account she also gets the 6 attack onto her, so a total of 30 attack on her first hit. Which, if you also take into account Deathblow 3, which many of them run, means a +36 before taking into account her actual attack stat. It's just a lot. So, a total nuke of 66 attack before taking into account weapon triangle, which also comes at 3 movement squares, is just astounding. Many units can't even take that. Most blues would just fold under this. And if she happens to double you, it's even worse. So, It's just an extremely powerful build, and it's fairly low investment. All it needs is a Nino, probably one of the only green units that can massively make use of a Nino's tome better than her. The ability to come at 3 spaces just has to be repeated. Just being able to move into ranges faster than others is really strong, and not only is she good in the player hand, but she's good in the AI hand. So she will perform well for you when using and also when trying to get defensive wins. Grunraven, it's a completely different goal, but it does it extremely well. She is the hard counter to Braveland and Reinhardt, just with the addition of Triangle Depth 3. She comes with this in her initial 5-star kit too, so additional bonus. So the only downside, if it can even be called a downside, is it lacks the explosive power of Groundblade. So it means that you cannot just eliminate a unit off the map. You are more of a bait unit in this instance. It's definitely worth building, if nothing else, just because it's easy to use and effective for the low investment. So moving on, we're moving on to, I would probably say, maybe even tied, but in my opinion, the queen of the low investment, high reward mage, Nino. Available at 3 and 4-star. Her stats speak for themselves. The fastest green mage in the game at natural speed. 33 and 39 offensive starts with a plus food bane cannot be ignored. She comes with drawback, she comes with ground blade, she comes with hone attack, she comes with a very, very good kit from the get-go. From the get-go, she was good. She got paired up with Erica for a reason. If she made good use of those stats, and she was able to double and kill so many units. And her ability to be summoned easily meant she could easily get access to her speed boon. And after Inheritance, she only got better. She got B skills, which could either get breakers, or she could run Desperation, and now she could change her A skill to Fury to further increase her speed, and also increase her bulk, or maybe even Life and Death if you wanted just more nuke. She's just overall good. She did have trouble tanking all Reinhardt builds in certain scenarios because of her low HP stat, but with the advent of Sacred Seals, it's almost a moot point because she can just mitigate that with distant defense if needed, or even with deflect magic. So going more into the build, it's just strong. A 33-39 cannot be ignored. And then we start adding into buffs such as hone attack, hone speed, and then additional, it just ramps up higher and higher. And with Moonbow, she can break into even bulky units that should be able to just try to tank her. Life and Death, definitely an option if you want a more nuke oriented. It does mean she can't bait, so that's definitely do that at your own discretion. So due to her ability, her functioning due to buffs and low HP, it means she is liable to get panic ployed, so that's something to definitely keep note of. So as a final decision, it's great. It needs almost no investment to be good. And if you invest to it, it only gets better. So, surprise! Moving on to Faye. Availability at 4 and 5 stars. So, balanced across the board. So, I will say when she was her initial kit is really mediocre. Renewal 3 is good. Threaten Attack 3 is pretty good. Late Breath is okay. She has a lot of HP, but her middling stats on outside of that hurts her viability. Her skill set is wanted to be a hard to kill unit, but the stat allocation betrays it. She's not really fast. Her defense stats are okay, but they're not really high. She tried to invest too much into too many areas that she didn't do it well enough. But because of the way the metagame just shifted to offensive blues, she is in the perfect state to just thrive. Her previous okay speed is now basically perfect for what she needs to just counter Reinhardt's. She's fast enough to counter Reinhardt's. She doesn't overly invest into it, so she can invest into it into HP to make use of other skills such as Panic Ploy and Infantry Pulse to further support her team. She has enough defensive stats to make use and kill and tank almost every variant of Bolin if invested into correctly. She can run Triangle Depth 3 if you just want to take no damage from any blues and just laugh at all Reinhardts. And she just also comes with trainee bonus stats and infantry stats, which means she just is very, very good as a whole. It is worth noting that she is expensive to build. She is very, very expensive to build if you want to do everything I did list, but you don't have to do everything there. All she needs is Lightning Breath to perform her job well at countering Reinhardt, and after that, it's just additional toppings on the cake. If you want to just laugh at archers, give her Steady Breath. If you want to just laugh at all blues, put Triangle Depth, Fury, or Distant Defense, and she will take almost no damage from almost every blue. Her B skill is who you want to counter. I would say Bowbreaker 3 is the strongest option due to her ability to counter Reinhardt and Bravelyn in one unit. She will take almost no damage from Reinhardt because of her high res stats and also her natural advantage because of being green. But with Bowbreaker, it means Bolins will get doubled, and because of the buffs to Lightning Breath, she will target the lower defensive stat to pretty much always get the KO. Her C skill is up to your own. I would say Decision, Hone, Panic, Infantry are all excellent, and Sacred Seal should be whatever you didn't choose, either whether it be Panic Ploy or Distant Defense. She is the best green dragon in the game, and also the worst because she's the only green dragon. Important to note, she has this niche that no other unit can fulfill because she is the only unit of her type. Alright, so the overall takeaway. So, Julia, Deirdre, Nino, Cecilia, and Surprise Unit Faye are all the highest return per investment. Whether this be just because they require so little actual investment to them to actually perform splendidly, or in the case of Faye, who requires a lot of investment, but she gives so much in return. Then we have Tier 2, which includes Rajat, Sonia, Spring Camilla, Summer Elise, Inigo, and Halloween Henry, who are in the middle of that. They do require a decent amount of investment to truly shine, but they do quite well for the investment, and they do return quite a lot depending on how much you decide to invest in them. Specific examples being Summer Camila or Rajat. And then we have tier 3, which are the heavy investments, which include Merrick, Bowie, Female Robin, and Soren. While they can do as well as the others in the other higher tiers, they do require much more investment to do the same things that a lot of the higher tiers do. So, again, I will remind you, any unit in this game can be strong, and some units will definitely fit better in your team than others. It all depends on what you need into your actual team. So, that will be that. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I hope this was informative. This was more than anything just a resource that I want to provide to the community, especially to newer players who are unsure who they want to invest in, as well as people who are on the fence between different units. So, if you liked it, please rate, comment, subscribe. If you didn't like it, still let me know and tell me how we can improve. And if you do want to see this again, please let me know, as well as what you would like to see. So, again, I hope everyone has a great day, and I hope you all enjoyed.